behalf of the Work Better Now team, I'd like to welcome everybody to Working Better Now, a series on workbetternow.com featuring a Q&A with a successful business leader. And today we're thrilled to be joined by Olivet Jones, Managing Director of the Felicity Group Limited. And Olivet, I want to thank you for joining us, and let's jump right in. Please tell us a little bit about the Felicity Group.
Hey, and it's a pleasure to be here, Rob, with you. So I founded the Felicity Group in 1991, and to really understand its history, I got to go back a few more years. For about 10 years prior to that, I worked for a mid-sized consulting company, and it was owned by a gentleman who was either the first or the second African-American principal at McKinsey, depending on whose version you believe. And so I was really kind of steeped in a very, very good learning environment. I worked with a lot of really, really smart people. And I got to a point in my career where I wanted to understand what causes people who are different, whether they are women or they are people of color, to succeed and fail. And actually built a practice around that. Well, one fine day, I had a client, and I won't call the name, but it was a global top 25. You would know the name if I called it. And I had kind of burned out on being the practice head. I actually like working with clients, okay? And we were having a drink one night, and she said, if you ever wanted to do this on your own, I would be more than happy to support you. Well, we didn't have any non-competes. All the contracts were in order. I went home, thought about it, and the Felicity Group was born. People often wonder where the name came from. It actually came from my cat. One day, who was named Felicity. And
Perfect.
One day, I was trying to get her to do something that she really didn't want to do. And she just sort of, put herself in like, no, I am an individual. I have rights. I know I'm making a story up in my head. But it was one of those strange epiphanies, seriously, where I looked at her and I said, this cat has more grit than you do. And I went out the next day, opened a checking account under Felicity Communications, and it wasn't a couple of months later that it was born. We've been in business since 1991.
Wow. And tell us a little bit about what the company does, maybe even a little bit about how that's evolved, and particularly, how it's evolved lately.
Sure, especially given what I do. Today, we have kind of two branches, if you can think of it that way. The original concept was, if you call me a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, I will probably disconnect from this call. Because I always saw myself as a consultant who was in the business of helping organizations really understand, what are we talking about when we talk about diversity, equity, and what we now call equity and inclusion? But again, I have to go back a little bit. If you can think back 30+ years ago, the language was very different. And to your point, in those days, it was helping organizations understand that this was not about legal compliance. This was not about, there's a place for that. There are things you just have to do if you're a citizen. But it really was about talent. There was a study that came out, I think it was called Workforce 2000. I know it was called Workforce 2000. I think it came out in 1987. But basically, it was a Census Bureau-based study that showed that the workplace would look very, very different. And they were talking about 2000, and it happened a little bit faster, okay? So in the early days, it was what I would call DEI 101. What is diversity? Why does it matter? Why should it matter to you? And so forth and so on. Later, I really, about 10 years of doing some serious training, and I think we had an impact. We actually had 2 courses in the curriculum of the largest telecommunications company in the world. So we had impact. But as I began to really look at where do you want to have impact, Olivet, it was about changing game. I call it changing the game. And so we started working with a model of mindset and behaviors. Some people call it head, heart, and hands. I don't personally believe that you can script these things. And I am so done with politically correct. It just makes smoke come out of my ears. It really, really does, okay? So then for the second 10 years, we were working more at strategic change. And very often that would start with, classic strategy, some assessment of the current state, some vision of what would be the ideal, and then how do you close the gap? So while we still did education during those years, we were looking more at tapping into the thinking of people who actually shape the culture. And that was often leaders, executive leaders, as well as managers, down to kind of mid-level management. And I think did a lot of good work there in what in my field is called large systems change. My goal is to move the whole culture. Well, if you can't roll forward a few more years, I realized, it's funny how epiphanies come, Rob. Literally, I ran into a client on the street and she said, Olivet, good to see you. You did such great work for us. And then it kind of fell off. And I said, why? She said, because we didn't know how to take it to the next level. So me with my lightning fast mind said, aha, executive coaching. But at that time, the only pathway into coaching really was a PhD in organizational psychology or industrial psychology. And I didn't want to invest the time. And I didn't want to learn a bunch of things like statistics that I would never care about. But I just kept my ear out. And then one day, I connected with someone who's now a friend. And I think she gave me the courtesy interview simply because someone else had connected us. She said, I'll be in Chicago for 15 minutes. I can give you 15 minutes. Well, 2.5 hours later, we were walking down the street eating popcorn. If you know Chicago, you know you got to go to Garrett's Popcorn. And she invited me to be part of a coaching cadre that was being put together for a global professional services firm. I sort of skipped through all the hard stuff. So I did that for a while, and this is getting to your point in the last few years. I did that for a while.
How long ago was that?
Oh, that was probably about 10 years ago now.
Gotcha.
And then later decided at the very strong impetus from a corporate client to get my certification. So I have all kinds of certifications in coaching. But how that relates to the more recent years, we're coming out of the pandemic, May 2020, George Floyd, and all that has transpired since then. The pivotal moment for me was thinking about where do I really want to have impact? And my space is the corporate space. And I just had decided, I was thinking about it, kind of running in the background, but I decided that where we're really going to focus is what I call organizational coaching and transformation, which simply means we'll work with the system side, your people systems, how you hire people, how you develop people, how you grow people. But I really want to get into people's heads. And that's the work that we've been doing a lot of lately to help them unpack three things. Number one, what do you really think about difference? Because we all know the right things to say now. And difference is really about various elements of identity group. Some of those identity factors are core, kind of my earth suit, how I came here. Some get layered on as we move through life. We pick it up from our family, from whatever societal elements that impacted us as we matured. And then finally, the work piece for most of us, who whatever your work may be. But when you really think about it, Rob, that's a lot of permutations of things that influence how we think. And I realize that many people don't think about how they think. They just kind of bounce along doing what they've always done. So that head piece is something I have really been double downing on for the last 2 years. And I was very blessed. Again, I had the opportunity to put together, I call it an executive development DEI leadership. It's a 1-year system. And I worked with one organization for, I think we actually, before it was all over, we took 250 some people through some version of it, either the long version, the medium version, or the short version. And then my oldest client that I've worked with for 20 years, last year we ran it with their top 20, and it is a game changer. Because it's not just like, do these 3 things and don't do these 4 things. We turn these folks inside out. Now, the funny thing about me, as I seem to have a particular propensity for working well with white men, go figure. And many of my clients, especially at the senior level, sit in that space. So that's the work that we're doing now. When all that happened, if I were home in Chicago, I have a whiteboard in my little area, my study, if you want to call it that. And I wrote so I wouldn't forget it. 2022. Where do we go from here? Because my feeling was, with all the tragedy that happened to Mr. Floyd, had it not been for the pandemic, that whole incident would have been just a news cycle, because it happens every day. What was different about that is that it happened on national television while we were all, just hunkered down and wherever, and you were watching it over and over and over again. Kind of like the influence that the television had on the civil rights movement back in the 60s. Had it not been on camera, folks from the Northeast and other parts of the country would never have known just how horrible that whole thing was. And my concern in the DEI space is if it's just going to be reactionary, and I want to be very careful here because people have strong opinions. Some people might say, well, whatever it took to get us to this point, I can respect that. But I want to know what these companies are going to be doing 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. So if I look at it through my business side, talent comes in many packages. It's just stupid not to be effective. I don't worry about, to be effective. And then if I look at it through my human side, I personally believe that human beings are God's greatest design. So who died and gave you, not you, but the hypothetical you, the right to mistreat, diminish, all that ugly stuff, anybody? And so you can see I'm pretty passionate about it.
Yes.
And that is where my work is centering now, is working with those who are ready to do the work.
Right. And my takeaway as I'm listening to you speak is, at the end of it, I always think in terms of outcomes. I have done a lot of things in my career. Marketing was one of them. And at the end of the day, you're giving these executives and then by way of doing so, the companies that they're a part of, a strategic edge. I mean, that's the bottom line that I'm hearing. Would you say that that's accurate?
Oh, it's extremely accurate. I wasn't sure exactly where we were going to go today, so I don't have the facts and figures right before me. But anybody can go out on the internet. McKinsey has done an extensive series of studies on if you just want to talk about, hard business outcomes, on the ROI of having diverse and inclusive work environments. And when I started, I remember the only real case we had was Ryder trucks. I don't even know if Ryder's is still in business. I hope they are. But now we have hard data about impact on ROI. We have hard data on decision-making agility for boards that are more diverse. Pricewaterhouse has done some extensive studies, and Deloitte has a whole suite of material, as does Korn Ferry. I bring those things up, not to mention now we have in the academic institutions, University of Michigan, et cetera, hard, good, solid research studies. And I bring those things up for this reason. You and I could tell an executive the absolute same thing and be totally right, okay? But when you have a strong research base, and I think McKinsey now is, and don't quote me on this, but I think McKinsey is now beginning to move into regression analyses, like over time, there's enough of a track record there. That research base is going to open people's eyes, and it works. So we now know that diverse teams outperform homogeneous teams 3-to-1. We now know that market share, this is kind of an old study, but market share, a correlation between the increase in diversity in the workforce and market share. Now, you said you came out of marketing. Depending on what your market is, a 1% bump can be a few million up to tens of millions of dollars, again, depending on what your market share is. And I think your point is really an important one because everybody doesn't do everything for altruistic reasons. Wouldn't it be nice? But that's just not going to hit the mark for everybody. But that's why I said it's bad business. If you can read and you believe any of these credible sources, I say that it's important to become effective at navigating across lines of difference. One of the biggest mistakes I see companies make is go out and hire a bunch of folk who are different. And one of my dear friends in the industry says, diversity is what you don't have. Okay, I can agree to that. But go out and hire people and then try to make them just like everybody else. Because they bring a perspective, they bring a life experience as well as a professional experience. It can be very different. And so it's not just about diversity, which is the representation, who's in the mix. It is about inclusion. Equity came on the radar screen during the last 2 years, but equity is not new. Those of us who work in the corporate and professional space borrowed it from social justice. And equity is about, I think it was a professor from Harvard years ago, I saw this formula, is a function of power, opportunity, and access. And if you like math, you can just play with,
Right.
If we move, what do we do here? Power, to me, is so important. We like to talk about power in our society. We like to think we're all egalitarian and all that kind of stuff. Power is not domination. Power is using the resources that are available to you to move. If there's socialized power and personal power. Socialized power is where I use the resources that are available to me to move the collective good forward. That's what I mean by power. And I want to be very, very clear about that. There's nothing wrong with personalized power because sometimes, and I have benefited from this, I have had clients just say, hey, you know what? You're my consultant, that's it. And I've got the ability to do it. And I was like, thank you very much. But power is like electricity. I'm sitting here in a room and I turned on the light and I can see a little better and you can see me better. Now, if I go stick my finger in the plug and electrocute myself, can I blame the socket? No. And that is what I think we have to begin to understand, especially women, because that's the other part of my business now. I actually have created, formed, incorporated a new entity, and we're still building it out, but that one is for women, and it's women that I call prime time women. They're women over 50. And they are women who have been fortunate enough to, have the professional career, the means and so forth, and sometimes still don't know what they want to do with their lives. I say our midwife dreams, okay? Because we are a cadre that society likes to write off. Oh, you're over 50, and heaven forbid you're over 60, 65. Oh my goodness, you're ready for the grave.
I think that's starting to change, I believe. Don't you think so?
I think it is. I think it is mostly because I do think it is, but I also think it's there.
Yeah.
And I think some of it is contextual, but what the research would say that during the pandemic, women in general were disproportionately affected, partly because of, personal family kinds of things, but partly because we were rethinking what do we want to do with our lives. And I think it was the New York Times did a really good piece on that, and probably the Wall Street Journal too. There was a wake-up call on so many levels, but largely around values. And that wasn't just for women. I know men who were very successful and said, I don't want to fall on the sword anymore. I know how to make money. I know how to keep money. I know how to grow money. And I want to do something every day that makes a difference. So, well, the headline's a great resignation. a lot of it talks about entry-level jobs and mid-level jobs, but there's a fair amount of folks just opting out, at higher levels as
Absolutely.
well. So to your point, I think that is still changing about women. I don't think we're there yet.
Gotcha. So thanks for sharing a lot about what you do. Let's talk a little bit about how you do these things. What does your team look like?
My team is in transition. So right now, we have a team of about 8 consultants, and we're building up our infrastructure team. That was always my weak spot. So, and we're taking advantage of, as many companies are, of the virtual space. So there are people who are very much an integral part of my team that are not employees, and what companies like Work Better Now. And there are significant benefits to do that and to do it the right way. So we have the 8 consultants. We have an administrative assistant, an executive assistant to me. We have a designer that we work with heavily on like our graphics. We have instructional designers. We have 2 of those. That's it for now. We are building out our branding. We're the only company I know that's been in business this long with a website you can't find. Now, on one hand, there's a testimony to us because it's all relationships. So we're working on, a bigger branding thing. But I've always seen and wanted to be more of a bespoke company.
Gotcha.
I thought different times about growing, really don't want to. So the solution is we have formed strategic partnerships with companies that do a great job. We run it as, we have the client relationship, but they are very clearly represented as, they are not us. This is their company, their brand. My responsibility is to make sure the client is happy. And that model seems to be working very, very well for us.
So another question about your team, and also, I guess, your role as CEO, because you, in a way, you're part of the product or service, right? I mean, it's Olivet Jones, and you're doing, I guess, some of the delivery, or at least some of the selling, but at the same time now, you're the CEO and you're trying to grow this organization, even if you're not necessarily focused on hyper growth, you're growing it as you said, in a bespoke way. So how is that transition going for you? In other words, going from being all about Olivet to, hey, it's the Felicity Group and there's a team here, and going from doing a lot of the delivery yourself to now building an organization.
Great question. The reason we're called the Felicity Group and not Olivet Jones as the associates is because I never wanted to be the center of the universe. So I have a lot of people behind me, but what I have found in the consulting arena, I was just on one of my clients is on a board, and he referred us, and I don't know if we'll get the business or not, but the first question they ask is, who's actually going to do the work?
Right.
Because in some consulting structures, a seasoned person like me does the pitch, but then you have a junior team that really does the delivery. One thing I think we have done extremely well, is I will stack my consulting team up against anybody. And I will only put people in the consulting role who can replace me.
Yeah, gotcha.
And they do that very well, and that's intentional. So there are some clients that are my clients. I call them my heart clients. But there are other clients where I have no problem elevating other people.
Right.
And saying, this person is actually better at what I do, at doing what they do than I am. I like leading from behind. I really, really do. And so, as I said, we're building up the infrastructure. Consultants can't beat them.
Gotcha.
Far none. In terms of the transition, I never thought of myself as a CEO. That's why I'm not called the CEO. Because I don't want to be the CEO in that sense. I believe in surrounding myself with really, really smart people who are really, really good at what they do. The person who's working our branding, absolutely brilliant. Her company is out of San Francisco. I found her because I was scanning not just websites, but whole branding strategies that I really liked. I've talked with her several times. She gets what I'm trying to do. My job then is to provide the resources, the information to let her do her job well. And I've always led like that. I've always led like that. Stay out of your own way.
Right.
I have a little saying that people laugh. I said, if I'm the smartest person in the room, we're all in trouble.
Right. Right. Gotcha. Thanks for sharing that. Let's switch gears a little bit more and tell us about your experience with Work Better Now and a little bit about your assistant, Summer.
Sure. Like many people, for many years, I had a full-time dedicated, in my office kind of person. Even going back to, my earlier careers in consulting, I always had a dedicated assistant. My assistant became ill, and it was time for her to move forward in her life. She's fine, fortunately. And so the world had changed. Technology had changed. I met someone who was running a global business from his phone and doing very well. Okay, it's an import business. And so I said, be open. Kissed a few frogs in the virtual space, really. And then came across Work Better Now. There are many things I like about it. One is Andrew gets business. And I know you know his background, and I know his background. He really gets business. I think it's a brilliant business model. I was impressed that I got an email from the owner minutes after, doing the landing page. Now, whether he sent it personally, I really don't care. It was the right touch. I was a tough client. Let's just say we had to negotiate their process. Partly because I used to do recruiting. And so I look at resumes differently. And what I really appreciated was their working with me. Summer was not the first assistant I had. The first one, I think we developed so well, she went off and got a great job in the DEI field. And I'm really happy for her in that regard. So Summer is relatively new. And when I say relatively new, I think she's been with me about 6 weeks. I really like her maturity, her professional maturity. We walk in a space that's pretty high level, And I say that in humility, but that's just our world.
Mm-hmm.
So having the right temperament, the right decorum, the right deportment matters. She is a brilliant writer and really good at systems, She just kind of quietly organizes things and, all that. And frankly, she can deal with my temperament. I'm a really pleasant person, but I'm a classic entrepreneur. We move fast, we talk fast, we got 1,000 things going. And that's not work to me, that's fun. I consider it a blessing that I get to do what I love to do and people actually pay me for it. And she can track with me. In the beginning, I think that she was coming from a space where maybe a little bit more permission was required. And so we had that dynamic tension of, forming and finding each other out, where she was waiting for me to give her the green light. And I was like, well, why isn't it done?
The light's always green here, right?
Yeah, the light's always green. If it needs to turn red, you better tell me, okay? But what I really appreciated about her is it was never contentious. And this is where her maturity came in. She just kept digging and digging and digging. And frankly, I needed somebody who's strong enough to deal with me. If you know anything about the DISC and the Myers-Briggs and all that kind of thing, Summer and I are polar opposites. We are literally polar opposites.
That's perfect.
And that's what makes us a powerful team. And because diversity is my work, if I can't she is exactly what I needed. And I would say is having tremendous impact in the first 6 weeks. I told her, I said, Summer, it's going to take you full 90 days to figure out what I do. So, we're not aspiring to perfectionism. Here's the sandbox. Don't do this, don't do that, and you'll be fine. If you make a mistake, we recover. So I'm really, really enjoying working with her.
That's terrific to hear. And thank you for sharing. Olivet, what do you like to do when you're not working?
Some of my friends would say, it depends on how you define work. I do garden. I love gardening. I'm an avid gardener. But I'm more of a dilettante. I remember reading a book years ago called The Renaissance Woman. I said, that's me. I have a lot of interests. So during the pandemic, I was taking a raw food course. I'm a vegetarian and I love raw food. I said, I'll do a raw food course online because they hadn't been offered online before. Now I'm taking a home decorating course online, having a ball with it. So I'm a lifelong learner in that regard. Before the pandemic, I was very involved with my church. I still am, except we're just getting back to full swing in terms of some of the we call them auxiliaries, some of the the ministries that I used to serve in. Some made it to virtual transition, some just got put on pause. But my best day is a day where I can go sit on the beach, stare at the ocean, and ponder the wonders of the world. We were in a group, look, I shouldn't say this on camera, but it's so true. We were in a group thing doing an icebreaker with some people I dearly love. It was one of those things that you describe someone and then the others had to guess who it was. Everybody knew me. They said, Olivet's perfect day is somewhere in a mountain overlooking the ocean with a cup of tea and not another human being around. And 35 people said, that's Olivet. So I enjoy my company. And I guess that's what I do when I'm not working. I just kind of meander and do what I feel like. Yeah, because my work is so structured, we run back to back,
Sure.
All of us. That's what I do, is figure out what do I want to do today without that pressure of structure and time. That's where I recharge.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing. Olivet, where can people find out more about you and your company?
Oh my. Oh, let's see. Probably the best thing to do is, because we are doing the whole rebranding, we've taken everything down. So I would say, let's use connect@felicitygroup.com. Our LinkedIn, our website, and all that will be back up at a later point. But for now, connect@felicitygroup.com is our opening, is the best way to reach us.
Fantastic. Olivet, thanks so much for taking a few minutes out of your day to speak with the Work Better Now community.
You are so welcome. Enjoy
A lot of
your
fun.
day.